Good afternoon to my fellow Kentuckians and to any other human beings who happen to be watching this. My governor, Andy Beshear, has been doing a pretty good job of keeping all of Kentucky informed during this pandemic. And I thought I could, every once in a while, do a video myself for social distancing and or pandemic issues. My name's Dan Martin. I'm a Louisville native. I went to Georgetown University years ago. I wanted to be governor of Kentucky at one time. That was before I realized how brutal politics were. And I don't know who would subject themselves to that level of scrutiny these days, but not me, that's for sure. That's my son, Ethan, who he's off camera, but he just knocked something over. And that gets to my first point. In a time of a pandemic, and if I have any wisdom for this, it's because in my family we have a member with some medical complexities, and I won't go into any more depth than that because I believe people deserve privacy when it comes to their medical outlook. But with medical complexities, there is a sense of being isolated at times. And, so I have a little bit of experience with self-isolation or social distancing just because of how tricky it is sometimes to make and or carry out plans. And I think that's the first thing, is that plans often, when made, need to take a little trip to the paper shredder. A lot of times that's the first stop plans make. I have another child jumping on a trampoline in the background. And that has kind of played out with this whole thing. I was going to do some YouTube lives, and I found out, well, you need 24 hours for YouTube/Google to approve you to do live broadcasts. And then yesterday we had some issues with just family issues. So I'm 48 hours later doing this than I expected to, but that's kind of lesson number one, that if you have something you want to do, you got to be patient. Sometimes it may or may not take place. Another example of being adaptable, I took my glasses off because with my low production values here, and I mean, at a time like this, are production values really important? I don't think so. But with my low production values, my glasses were reflecting all sorts of light, and it was distracting to me trying to do this. So I was like, nah, just get rid of the glasses. Do it 48 hours later. Just being flexible is the first piece of advice I have for social distancing. The second piece of advice I would have is just trying to keep an even keel. I mean, sometimes things are not going to go your way. And a lot of times I've learned this lesson more through error than through trial. But when things don't go your way, there has to be a sort of like, okay, now what, as opposed to bemoaning that situation, because there's a lot worse going on with this pandemic than whatever my plans or your plans might be getting delayed or having a bit of a frustrating circumstance surrounding them. I mean, right there, you just got to kind of let it go. I'm making a video and I have a child that screams in the background. So, life happens. And so I think, keeping an even keel, being really aware that your plans are going to, in many cases, just simply either not come to fruition at all or have to be reworked and reworked and reworked before you're able to execute them. Those would be my two biggest pieces of advice I've learned from having a family situation with some medical complexities. And how that might work out with social distancing. I think music helps. Humor can help. Obviously, we need to be social distancing and we need to be following the best advice in front of us. But we also need to be very aware that sometimes, even when you're doing all the right things, things can go wrong. Medical things can go wrong, and we have to be ready for that as well. But when it comes to dealing with the time on our hands, I think music, reading, humor, those are all important. Having my family around has been great. I'm sure at times I've gotten on their nerves, they've gotten on mine, but there are a lot of people out there that live alone, and there are ways through things like Google Meet or WhatsApp or, there's all those Apple apps for speaking to one another. There's, things like Skype and Google Hangouts, et cetera. There are ways to have some human contact. I think that's incredibly important. I mean, if you just look at our species, aside from our opposable thumbs and all that stuff, we tend to do very well. Here's another example of, I've got to punch in a code for somebody. Here you go. Well, I guess that didn't work. Hold on. Nobody promised anybody a rose garden here. Gosh. All right. So, when we are trying to manage our social situation. I mean, we're creatures, we're human beings. We thrive on human contact. Even the introverts among us, like a certain amount of human contact. I'm an extrovert, so at least as far as I can tell. And there we have somebody at the door. Somebody at the door, and I'm going to hit pause and come right back to this because I've got a child getting the door for me. This is very nice. I mean, as crazy as this is and as bad as the production values are, this is maybe a kind of microcosm of what we're dealing with in terms of the pandemic. But I think human beings, we like social contact. We like face-to-face contact. Sometimes we like touch, and that can be tricky in this time. Giving hugs, handshakes, high fives, all that stuff is probably very much limited. We have somebody coming in the door right now. Again, terrible production values, but that's the lesson, people. My final thought I'll end on is just to give. I mentioned Andy Beshear at the beginning. He's our governor in Kentucky. I lived in Ohio for 7 years. My wife and 2 of my 3 children were born in Ohio. And Ohio, their governor, Mike DeWine, is a Republican. Andy Beshear is a Democrat. The 2 of them have worked together quite well, and they've done good work for their states in terms of dealing with the pandemic. And one thing I would say is like the term politics comes from a Greek word polis, which means city. And so the question of politics at its most basic form is how do we live together well? How do we live in a city or community together well? And some of that is going to require patience. It's going to require cooperation. And in the case of those 2 governors, give a nice shout out to each of them. It requires, putting petty differences aside and focusing on the communal or common good. And so in that regard, I think we got to give nice shout out to any number of public servants around the country and around the world who've done that. And to those who haven't yet done that, we can hope and maybe encourage them to start putting, good public health information ahead of everything else. And so I leave you today. I don't know if this was helpful or not. It's a little slice of life for all of us. We're all in a weird spot, but at the same time, maybe some of the wisdom that we might acquire during this interesting and new situation can serve us well now and into the future. So have a great day. Stay safe, stay healthy. And, if you want more of these, let me know. Bye.